Do this. Good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Basra, Daf Kuf Lamed Beis, starting at the very top. We'll be heading toward the bottom of Kuf Lamed Beis by the second to last line of Yirtzeh Hashem. And the Gemara here opens with a similar question as we started with last night. Boi Rava Bebari Heich. No, this is not asking the same question again. It's asking about the previous din, that if a husband were to give over his properties to his wife, we had said she becomes an aputropa. So the Gemara says, when is this true? Is it true when he's only a shchiv meirah, or is it even true when he's a bari? Do we say it's b'shchiv meirahu denichale delishtamun mila? He wants it to be only when he's a shchiv meirah does he want to give it over to her in the form of an aputropa, because when she holds all the cash, then all the kids remain perfectly respectful of her, deferential because she is holding the money. Aval bebari hakoi ihu, but had he been healthy, then he would be alive, and therefore he would be the one who could demand covet for his wife, and therefore the kinyan would be perfectly fine, and she actually owns everything, and it's not aputropa. O dilma bari nami, or no, maybe we would say that even if the husband was a bari, nichale de lishtamun mila mehashta, it's still good for the children to have a very high level of respect for their mother, and therefore, when he says that he's giving over all of the property to the wife, it's even as a bari, and she's an aputropa even now. So again, we had said yesterday that if a husband gives property to an isha, she functions as an aputropa. Is that true only as a shchiv meirah, or is it true even as a bari? So the Gemara brings a brisa. The first couple of parts of this brisa are unnecessary in regards to what we need, but we're of course going to learn them anyways. 4 lines down. Tashma kose peros nechasa leishto. A person writes over fruits from his orchard to his wife. The halacha is that doesn't replace her ksuba. Gova ksuba samina karka. Even though he gave her something, even if what he gave her was the equivalent of her ksuba, but if it was in the form of fruits, she is still allowed to collect her ksuba from karka. The fruits don't replace the ksuba. If it were to be lemechsa l'shlish v'lirvia, if the husband were to give over to his wife a half or a third or a quarter of a field, then govek subasa minashar. Then whatever's left over, too bad. He gave over 2/3. That's great. She keeps it. Well, actually, not 2/3. It's either half, a third, or a quarter. She keeps it. And not only does she get to keep that, but if she then ever needs to collect from her ksuba, she would do so from the balance of the land, from the parts that he didn't give over. Now, so far, these elements of the brisa were not what we've needed. Here, this is what we do need to answer our question. Kasav kol nechasav leishto. Oh, so that's our case. That's what we were discussing. That if a husband were to write over all of his nechasim to his wife, she'd be an aputropa. That's what we had said as we started off our day today. So here the case changes a little bit. Kasav kol nechasav leishto. If a man writes over all of his property to his wife, and then subsequently, v'yatza alav shtarcho, and then somebody came to collect from the husband. So the case is like this. Ruvain and Rachel are married. And Ruvain borrowed money from Shimon. So Shimon came to collect from that money, from Ruvain, but Ruvain wrote over all of his property to his wife. So who's Shimon supposed to collect from? So says the Gemara, this is a machlokes tanoim. The Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Tikra Masnasa, the gift that was given, namely the karka that the husband gave the wife, gets torn up, Vitamod al Ksubasa, and then she falls back on whatever her ksuba was worth. So that means that she is the priority when it comes to the chov, that she doesn't have to pay the chov, the husband has to pay the chov. If the husband gave away all of his karka, then it reverts back. That which he gave to his wife will revert back to the husband, and she remains being able to collect the ksuba from the karka of the Baal. So that's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim omrim, no. When the husband, and this is a fascinating din, it's a big kula. The Chachamim omrim tikra ksubasa, that when a husband gives over all of his karka properties to his wife, her ksuba is gone, dissolves. Says the Gemara, tikra ksubasa, v'tamod al masnasa, she gets to keep the gift. But that also means menimtzeis karachas mikanu mikan. That also means that she is literally bald in two different ways. It means she's lost out in 2 ways. She's lost out in that when the husband gave her the karka, she no longer has a ksuba, and she's also lost out in a secondary way in that when the Baal Chov shows up, It's collected from her property. So this is the machlokes tanaim that we have.
What's the mechanics of her losing ksuba? Because it's cold, but her.
No, because all of the property that was lien worthy is now hers.
But
there's nothing for her to collect from anymore because he gave her.
so it moves first. In other words, she doesn't have like a first claim.
That's a great question. The Gemara is going to discuss a little bit later why we don't follow what her intentions were, an umdana of what she would want. We're going to discuss that a little bit later. That's an excellent question.
That amount, so to speak.
Yeah, the Gemara is going to ask that, and there is a real answer in the Gemara to that question directly a little bit later in the page. So this is the machlokes. If a husband writes over all of his nechasim to his wife, so obviously now it's difficult for her to go back and say, hey, I need a ksuba. There's nothing to collect from. And not only that, the Balei Chov, what happens with them? This is the machlokes Hanayim that we saw, where Rabbi Eliezer said that the gift goes back into place and she keeps her ksuba, and the Chachamim say no, she loses her ksuba and she has to also pay back the Baal Chov. Rabbi Yehuda Nachdom Maisa, there was a story with Yehuda Nachdom, Be'ira Hadavar Bebas Achosi Kala, the daughter of my sister who is my daughter-in-law. Follow this is Yevamos, right? The daughter of my sister who is my daughter-in-law. That means that my son married my sister's daughter, first cousins. Why couldn't they just write that? Why does it have to be so difficult? Ben Dod, just write down, Ben Dod got married.
It's not his Dod. No, my first cousin is my Ben Dod. No, that's not his first cousin, that's his daughter. You know what I mean?
Well, no.
He is the Dod.
It's just gender, it's gender flip, Bas Dod, whatever.
Oh, he is the Dod, you're a generation off. When you say Ben Dod, you're talking about your first cousin.
No, this says that I am the father-in-law.
Hear what I'm saying?
But?
It's Achianid. Right. Achianid is the modern word, right, for a niece. Right.
I'm talking about who married each other. The cousins married each other.
But about the father
but he is speaking, right?
Which is his sister's.
There was a Misa with
he's not really the subject. The couple is the subject, and the same thing happened. Yeah.
If he said with two B'nai Dod, it would be, like excluding from himself. I'm just not sure how else you'd word it.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know where the word Afghani came. I mean,
I think it's modern.
That's not used in the Gemara. We learned Yevamos.
I think it's modern.
So it's Bivas Achosi, who is my kala. It's the daughter of my sister, who is my daughter-in-law. So my niece married my son. Okay. I have a great Misa. Somebody asked me this question. They said, it was like a Shomer Negiah within a family unit. Why can't you hug me? And that was the answer. Because I could marry you. You're my niece. I could marry you. And then it's like, it sounds awkward, but that's up to the Shteit and Chumash. It's just how it works, Okay. Says the Gemara as follows. V'amar Rabbi Yehuda in this case, Uba Maisa Lipnei Chachamim, V'amar Tikrak Ksubasa, the Tamod Almas Nasa B'nim says Karachas Mikan Mikan. Says the Gemara, we paskin like the Chachamim, that if a husband gives over all of the lien-worthy property to his wife, game is over. She now loses her ksuba. That's one loss. That's one of the karachas mikan mikan. That's one of the bald, one of the negatives, one of the losses. And the second is that the Balei Chov gets to collect from her property. Now, the Gemara makes a deal. Taima, the reason why this is true, the only reason why this is true was the Yotza Alav Shtar Chov, was because the husband had a complicating factor here in that he had Balei Chov who needed to collect from him. Halo Yotza, had it been the case that there were no Balei Chov, Halo Yotza Alav Shtar Chov, Kanya, we would have said that it was a sale. Now, this is a problem from what we learned. We said yesterday and earlier today that if a husband were to give over all of his properties to his wife, we're trying to figure out Shchib Meirah Bari, but if he gave, we said that she's not Kona, she's an Aputropa, because we wanted to make sure that the kids would remain respectful of the wife. That's what we said. But what do we see over here? That with no Baalei Chov, that she's Kona. Not that she's an Aputropa. Says the Gemara, B'mai. If you want to say that this took place when the person was a Shchib Meirah, well, that can't be, because if this case was talking about a Shchib Meirah, it shouldn't say Kanya. It then she should only be an aputropa, a manager of the fund, but she shouldn't be the owner of the fund. Elalav, it must be that we're talking about bibari, and therefore we have the answer to our question, a little bit long-winded, but we have an answer to our question that when a husband says, I'm giving over all of the possessions to my wife, and she is an aputropa, so that is talking about one case or another. But if in fact she's kona, so that has to be only talking about the case of a bari. Elalav bibari. Says the Gemara halfway down, 3 lines into the Y lines. No, not necessarily true. Le'olam b'shchiv meira. Perhaps what we're talking about is really that the case is with a shchiv meira, and still she could be kona. How could she be kona in these cases? The next line that we're about to read, starting with V'Ravavira, is a quote from the bottom of the previous Amud. 2 lines from the bottom. It's just distilled a little bit. On the bottom of the previous Amud, we saw this case of a husband giving his wife all of his property, or a daughter was getting property amidst her brothers, all the case may be, whatever the cases were there. So here we saw a number of shitas in the psak. Ravavira mukila bekulhu. Ravavira said that there was a kinyan in all cases except for one. And Ravina mukila beishto arusa veishto grusha, that we make an ukimt over there of what those cases we're talking about. But one way or the other, it's lav dafka that the answer is bari. We could even work it out that it should be a case of shchiv meira, and therefore we're not sure what the answer is to this question. And now the Gemara is going to continue by picking up on one piece of what we learned, and that was the shita of tikra ksubasa, the shita of the chachamim, that if a husband gives over his property to an isha, she loses her ksuba and has to pay the debtors. So Amar Rav Yosef Bar Minyumi Amar Rav Nachman halacha. This was the din. We saw this already. Tikra ksubasa v'talmana masnasa v'imsa karachas mikan u'mikan. So the Gemara says it seems to be from over here that she is just going to lose out. It's just the way things are. It's unfortunate, but she's going to lose out. She loses her ksuba. I guess it depends how much the property is worth. If her ksuba is worth $10,000 and the debtors are another $10,000, but the property is $100,000, okay, it's good math. She'll be making some bank, no problem at all. So it says the Gemara as follows: Lememra. What seems to be over here is the lo azil Rab Nachman Basra umdana. David, this was exactly your question. Why do we not follow what she wants? When this deal was made with her, that the husband gave her all of the properties, that she wants to keep the matana. We should follow what her return. She didn't know about the Baalei Chov. She had no idea. So why don't we do an umdana? We have a brisa that says black on white that we follow an umdana. What's that case? A man's son went out of the country, and he heard that his son Nebuch passed away. And he donated everything to the chesed fund. This is like Baharug Baragla. The kid came back from whatever country he was visiting and said, I'm here. So that's a big problem. And the son's like, why is my room empty? And the father's like, well, I donated everything. And then the kid, of course, flags the one thing that was most precious to him. Where's my whatever? It's all gone. So halacha l'maisa, what happened to those items? Are those items that were gifted, are they considered to be final and the gift is done and there's no backsies? Or do we say, no, we're going to be omeid what the son would have wanted? So it says the Gemara, according to the Tanakama, matnasa matana. According to the Tanakama, if a father gives away his son's property under the assumption that the son had died overseas, done, everything is gone. Reb Shimon ben Menashe Omer, and this is what we need to conclude our sugya over here. What does he say? Ein matnasa matana. She'ilu haya yodeh shebeno kayam lo kasvan. Had the father known that the son was alive, he never would have given it over. So we see from a brisa that we are omeid what the person wanted to do. And the Isha would never have agreed to this. So why are we not omeid what the woman's desire is or what the husband's desire is? Had the husband known what was going to happen, he may not have agreed either. So says the Gemara, one last little nail in the coffin here, but Amar Rav Nachman, halacha, Reb Shimon ben Menashe. So now not only do we have a svara, do we have a shita, but we paskin that way. We paskin that we are omeid a person's, so that means if I sell a car, and I only realize an hour later that or you find $1 billion in cash stuffed in the doors. But had I known, I never would have sold. So it's not a sale. That's not yours anymore. It says the Gemara, no, Shani Hasa. The case that we were talking about when he gives her all of the property and the Chachamim Paskin that she forgoes her ksuba to keep the karka. Shani Hasa. The Nicha law, it's better for her, the Tepu Kale Kala, that there should be a word out there, the Kasvin Hunei Hala Lahan Hunechasim, that she is then going to be the owner of property. That makes her feel wealthy. That makes her feel good. If a woman says, I either have a ksuba or I have 100 acres of land. Oh, there's no shiloh, what would happen? So the Gemara says, because we want to have a scenario where it's chashuv for her, so then we're omeid for her, but not in the way that you would think. We're omeid that she'd prefer this. That is the umdana. The umdana is that she would rather have this property than have the ksuba. And Tnan Hasam, 4 lines from the bottom on Kuf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Hakosev nechasav levana because of ishto karka kolshu of ksubasa. If a man were to write over property to his sons, and he also wrote a small parcel of land for his wife, she loses her ksuba. That doesn't sound right. It's not even shaveh b'shaveh. She didn't even get the value of her ksuba. It's a small, tiny little parcel. So the Gemara wants to know, why does this work? Mishum dekasav lakarka kolshu of ksubasa. Why? What is going on in this Mishnah? And this is a Mishnah from Maseches Peah. So we didn't learn it directly in our cycle of Daf Yomi yet. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. If a husband gives his wife a parcel of karka, why would it work? Why does she lose her ksuba? So to this, there are 3 answers, and then we're going to question these 3 answers. Amar Rav v'mezake lahen al yada. The schus happened with her. Namely, she was involved in the actual kinyan, so she knew what was going on. So in effect, she was mocheles. Ushmuel amar b'machalek lefaneh v'hi shosekes. That it was divided in front of her, and she didn't say anything. And the Rashbam quotes the well-known idea, shtika kehoda adamya. If she's standing there while they're making the transfer, and she says, or she doesn't say anything, but she's watching the transaction happen, she's not mocheles, she doesn't say anything, so the transaction is good. And lastly, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina Amar be'omer la tli karka zu b'ksubaseich. That's very clear. That's very direct. One way or the other, there is an ukimta over here that establishes that she should not be the owner of this ksuba anymore, and that there was a trade. That when the husband was giving the children, the boys, properties, and he allocated a small parcel to her, she agreed one way or the other, either by directly being involved in the kinyan or shtika kyota, or the language of the Gemara of Tli Karka Zu B'Ksubaseh. And this is Umikule Ksuba Shanukan. This is one of the rare leniencies that we see around the world of Ksuba. Normally we're very makbid on a woman's Ksuba. Here we are very makel on a woman's Ksuba. The Rishonim here discuss because we want to make sure the man remarries v'chule. Not for now. Tanan, we have a Mishnah. This Mishnah is found in Ksubas and Bechoros. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Im kibla alei, if she agreed to take this field and lose her ksuba, afal pishalo kasavla, then avda ksubasa. So this is the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says if she accepts this idea that she is going to trade her ksuba for a small parcel of land, she loses her ksuba. Michlal. This implies something that doesn't work according to the 3 Amoraim we saw on the bottom of the page. Michlal de Tanakama Sovar Ksiva v'Kabbalah Boy. That you need both the husband to write it over on a document that she's going to be giving over her ksuba, and v'Kabbalah, and that she actually received a little piece of property. V'chitema kula Rabbi Yossi. If you want to say that maybe our whole Mishnah is really Rabbi Yossi and there's no dissenting opinion, v'atanya, that can't be. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Emasai, when is this true? Shaisa Sham Shem v'Kabbalah Alei. Aval Haisa Shem v'lo Kabbalah Alei. If there was a topic of discussion but no Kabbalah, she didn't accept it. Or a Kabbalah Alei v'lo Haisa Shem. Or that she did accept it, but it wasn't both features, it wasn't written down. Lo Avda Ksubasa, Tiyufta de Kul Tiyufta. This rejects all 3 shitas in the Amoraim of Rav, Shmuel, and Rabbi Yossi, Reb Chanina. It's on the bottom of the page. So says the Gemara, Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman, ha Rav ha Shmuel ha Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina. We just analyzed those shitas and we know that they don't work anymore. Mar, you Rav Nachman, my svirule. What do you hold? So the Gemara says almost halfway down on Kuf Lamed Beis Amud Beis, heading toward the bottom of the page. Amar le Shani Omer Kevan Shasa Shutaf Ben Abanim Avdak Subasa. There's something else going on, which is that when she became a shutaf with the boys, she became an equal to the boys. and therefore the ksuba became irrelevant because she got something that functioned as an equivalent. This line is kind of like Omer Dorsheni a little bit, that just because she was a shutaf with the boys, now she loses her ksuba. What does that mean? So this is something that, of course, is going to be discussed in the Rishonim.
Always use an asset because of it's an entirely different asset.
What?
Ksuba is an asset, but so is the land.
Yeah.
So what does one have to do with the other?
Right. I mean, we'd have to figure out what the lumdus is here, but it seems to be that she's now equivalent to one of the boys. And in the same way that he's giving this as a Yerusha, that functions as a ksuba, whatever the lumdus is. So the Rashbam says, 10 lines from the bottom, Dibur Hamaskil Avda Ksubasa, Shere Asa Shuta, Ben Habanim Bekarka, Dahayanikas Karka, Aknila, Ruadin Lepers Mechubarin. She acquired land that was yonik from the ground. Same is true for the fruits that are attached to the ground. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, let's get back in the Gemara. Itmar Nami. We have the Amoraim talking about this also. Amar Rav Yosef, Parmin Yumi, Amar Rav Nachman, Kevan Shasa Shutaf Ben Abanim. Of the Ksuvasa, she then loses her Ksuba as well. And Boy Rava, Ravi asks again. This is our third Rava question. Fourth? I think it's our third. Says the Gemara, Bebari Heich, same question again, but this time what's it talking about? Bebari Heich, when is it that we say that if a husband were to give a parcel of land to his wife while he's allocating karka to his sons, that she loses her ksuba? Is that only true bebari, or is that true even bebari, or is it only true b'shchiv meirah? Mi amrinan b'shchiv meirah hu diyada de lesla v'kamachla. Do we say that perhaps it's only true by a shchiv meirah where she's mochelas because she knows the lesle, he has no more karka? The kamachla nebach, she feels bad now. She's going to be mochelas, so she got the small little karka that the husband gave when he was allocating to the brothers, and she says, "Fine, I'll forego my ksuba." Aval bebari, but had it been that he was healthy, she never would have agreed to this because sabra hadar kanim, because he would have purchased more in his lifetime. It's normal to buy property. Odilma, or perhaps hashtamias lesle, or perhaps we should say that just because right now he doesn't have any new property, so therefore she should have to forego her ksuba. So says the Gemara, Teku, we don't know the answer to that. And says the Gemara a couple more lines. Hahuda amar lehu palga lebrasu palga lebras. Half of my money goes to one daughter, and half of my money goes to the other daughter. Bitilsa leisas biperi. And a third will go to my wife of the fruit. Remember, we already gave away the parcels of land.
Yeah.
Half and half plus a third that's not math. So so the Gemara says that half of the physical property, the karka, the trees themselves, go to one daughter, half to the other, and a third of the peros go to the isha. So Ikla Rav Nachman l'Sura. Rav Nachman went up to Surah. All of the Gabe Rav Chizda went to go find the great Rav Chizda to find out the answer to this question. Amar Leki, I gav namai. What's the deal over here? Says the Gemara. What would be the din if I were to allocate to my wife a third of all the peros of the fields? Amar lehachi Amar Shmuel. Rav Chizda says, well, this was already taught already. Even if he only gave over one dekel for all the fruits of the ksuvasa. It says the Gemara, this can't be. Amar le Amor da Amar Shmuel hasam da akni la begufa da ara. I could understand perhaps that Shmuel will say she loses her ksuba if she got karka. That I could understand. But hacha pirahu. In this case, Rav Chizda is quoting Shmuel. All that's happening is she's getting peros. So peros, that's what we started with at the brisa on the top of the previous amud. The brisa taught us that if hakose peros nechasav leishto govek ksuvasa min karka. We have a brisa that says that. What are you talking about? So the Gemara says, Amar le metaltale ka'amris. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. You're talking about metaltalin? I didn't realize that. Metaltale vade lo kamakni. Lo ka'amina. That's pashut. He says that's for sure the case, that's not what I'm talking about. And therefore, falling back on the brisa, like we saw in the beginning of Kuf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, that if there were peros that a husband gave to his wife, and even more, even if the husband gave a half or a third or a quarter of a field, she's still govek suvasa bin ashar. And if it's metaltal and kol shekain, there would be no kinyan. We'll stop right here, 2 lines from the bottom, and pick up Emir Hashem tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.